Hi 735 class, it's me, Bo. I'm going to try a series of short lectures to bring us all up to speed on questions, which we're wrapping up, and then surveys, which is how you put questions to use in really a mass-aimed, mass-targeted, very standardized tool that we'll talk about in one of the next YouTube videos. But I want to point out first that I'm in Turkey. What you see back there is Istanbul. As I sit here in the airport, I thought it might be a nice time to shoot you a YouTube, and in doing so, hopefully I can connect with you over the miles as I head out to Albania here in a few hours. Airports, fascinating places to do research, right? You might hear languages in the background from all over the planet. Certainly this airport in particular is a fascinating hub for this neck of the woods. A lot of us are headed to the Far East, to the Middle East, to Europe. So you certainly get some linguistic diversity, which leads to all sorts of challenges as you try to communicate via questions in a given language. I've gotten to the point where if I'm doing something in the U.S., I will no longer do it in only English, just by virtue of Spanish being such a significant language, especially in the Southwest. So if you want to impress me in your final paper, final presentation, where you describe a methodology, also have it translated into Spanish. The way you do that actually is quite interesting. You have separate translators. So if I'm going to translate into Spanish, I will write my questionnaire in English. I will then give it to a Spanish speaker who will then translate it into Spanish, and that's the Spanish language questionnaire. But then what you have to do is one more thing. You have that Spanish level questionnaire, in Spanish questionnaire, translated back into English by a second interpreter. So you have two interpreters, one who interprets it into Spanish, another who interprets it back into English. And in doing this, you assure reliability, consistency, repeatability, and that you do in fact have a strong translation. Speaking of languages, Bo, stop talking about languages and get into questions. The things I wanted to point out that we didn't quite get to last week when talking about questions, there are really two kinds, I look like Nixon, two kinds of questions. There are open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. Let's talk about open-ended questions first. These are questions that are really good when you're exploring a new place, when you don't know much about a place. This is my first time in the Istanbul airport, so if I were doing a study on travel patterns at the Istanbul airport, I'd probably use a lot of open-ended questions because they allow you to gather a whole bunch of information, and in a situation like this where I don't know a whole lot about it, I don't feel as comfortable imposing answer categories onto these people here because I don't know a whole lot. So when you're in an exploratory study that covers a new topic or a new area, I look like a unicorn here. Try to I've been sleeping on the plane, so make sure. Okay, I look less like a unicorn now. So when you don't want to impose you on the answer categories, open-ended, really good way to go. You can get a whole lot of information when you ask people general questions like, so what do you think about this Istanbul airport? So that's one of the strengths. You can get a whole lot of information and you're not imposing yourself onto the answer categories. So one of the weaknesses, though, if the strength is you get a whole lot of information, the weakness is you get a whole lot of information. And then you got to organize it, right? You got to sift through it. So when I ask this person who just left, probably because they're intimidated by a professor delivering a lecture, especially a professor that looks like a unicorn right next to them, with open-ended questions, again, you get a whole lot of information. If you're asking people about what they think about the Istanbul airport, they will tell you, look, I was next to this goofy professor who had a unicorn on his head, and the city itself, though, of Istanbul, looked quite beautiful. On the other hand, the food wasn't really good at that airport, and I ran to a really mean guy in the airport. Bathrooms were disgusting, and pretty soon you've got all this information that you then have to go back through. So again, a strength is you get a ton of information. A weakness is you get a ton of information that often you have to go back into, and in digging through all of that, you've got to recategorize people. And the whole point of open-ended is to get people out of those categories. So there's probably a tension there when choosing the open-ended category. Great thing to use when you're new, when you're not quite understanding a field, when you're doing exploratory research in a brand new place like this. But closed-ended category or closed-ended questions are what you see very often as well, because it addresses some of those concerns, whereas open-ended, really difficult to analyze. Closed-ended questions, you can put people into tidy categorizational boxes. In fact, one of the slides from last week, I show people who are stuffing themselves into a phone booth, I think in England. And this was a pastime that people used to do a long time ago, but I'm reminded of this pastime when thinking about writing closed-ended questions, because it's a bit like stuffing a whole bunch of people into a phone booth. It's interesting and it's compelling, but you gotta wonder who's being suffocated in the process. You have to wonder about what's being lost by forcing people into boxes. People are rich. People are diverse. People have all sorts of things going on. And by imposing my idea of what the categories should be, it's a little bit limiting, right? On the other hand, easier to analyze later on. So when talking about closed-ended questions, there are really three types of these: nominal, ordinal, and interval. And in fact, those are more sophisticated. They measure more. They're higher levels of measurement as we get higher on that scale. Nominal is the lowest level of measurement. Really, this is name only. So if I were to go around this airport lounge and ask everybody here what country they're from, that would be a nominal level answer, a nominal level question. After all, being from Turkey doesn't mean you are more than being from Albania, which doesn't mean you are more than or less than being from France or the United States, right? It doesn't really make any sense to even have an order to country of origin. Just nominal level variables. Ordinal variables, on the other hand, there is an order that makes sense, but it's not quite numeric as yet. So an ordinal variable would be something like, you can tell that strongly agree is more than agree. I strongly agree that this is a fantastic airport. That's more than agree. But we're not quite to the level where this is numberable, countable, right? It's ordered. It makes sense. The answer categories have an order, and that makes sense. But on the other hand, it's not quite reaching the level of measurement that is the ultimate level of measurement, the highest level of measurement, that is the countable or interval level variable. Now, this is important because there are many things in the world that are countable, right? Age is countable, and it's called interval because the interval between 1 and 2 years old is the same as the interval between 4 and 5 years old. This is an equal interval. That's what you can think about when you think about interval level variables. So when you have countable variables, how much money did you make last year? Somebody who makes $20,000 makes twice as much as somebody who makes $10,000. And so therefore it is interval, it is countable, it is a math level of measurement. And that means something when you do statistics a little bit later on. Now, you can't just turn an ordinal level variable into an interval variable just by assigning a number. So just by saying, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hot am I, right? How attractive am I? Here is I am after 20 hours of long flights and unshowered and unicorn hair. Even if I impose 1 to 10 on that, if one of you says that I'm an 8 in attractiveness right now, and another of you says I'm a 4 in attractiveness, that 8 isn't twice as much. Really, that numeric value doesn't really make sense as a mathematical value. Interval, it makes sense to be able to say that something is twice as much as another thing. Again, age or weight. A 200-pound person weighs twice as much as a 100-pound person. Somebody who is 10 feet away is twice as far as somebody who is 5 feet away. But saying that somebody who is a 6 is twice as happy as somebody who is a 3, again, you don't know how people are sort of spacing those out, and so it gets a little bit murkier. So I hope that clears up nominal, ordinal, and interval level variables, which are themselves closed-ended questions where you impose categories, you impose fixed attributes. Remember, attributes are the boxes we put people into. And then coming back full circle, we started by talking about open-ended questions, which are great when you're doing exploratory work, great when you're starting out and really trying to figure out what you want to do. So with that, I'm signing off from Istanbul. Send me an email, send me a note if any of this is unclear.